When we think about the challenges interracial couples face, our minds usually jump to the big, overt stuff, right? But what about the quieter struggles? The silent disapproval from family, or the subtle biases that can slowly wear a relationship down? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore today. And we're kicking things off with this incredibly powerful quote from Serena Williams. It just perfectly captures the heart of this whole issue. It's about refusing to let anyone, whether it's a stranger or even someone you love, determine your self-worth based on their own prejudice. So, speaking of Serena, she's a global icon, obviously, but she recently shared a story that reveals a really deep private pain. She talked about the feeling of never being truly accepted by her husband's family, even with all his love and support, and she felt her race was the reason why. It's just a stark reminder that these hidden biases can affect anyone, no matter how successful they are. And look at how this rejection actually showed up. It wasn't some big, loud fight. Nope. It was in the distant stares and the patronizing politeness, That's such a subtle and honestly a more insidious kind of exclusion. It's so hard to call out, but it can make you feel completely isolated. And we've seen very similar stories from other public figures like Meghan Markle, which just highlights that this is a real pattern of quiet prejudice. Serena's story is just a perfect example of a huge challenge that so many interracial couples face, that tricky intersection where love runs right into these deeply ingrained family beliefs. So let's take a closer look at that dynamic. Experts actually have a name for this. They call it the caves of comfort. Just imagine a family that is always perfectly polite, always civil, but there's this invisible wall you just can't seem to break through. That politeness becomes a kind of shield, right? It lets them avoid confronting their own biases, and it stops them from offering that genuine, wholehearted inclusion. And a lot of this friction comes from these deep cultural values. I mean, look at this. You could have one partner who comes from a family where it's all about the collective, the we before the me. And the other partner's culture might really emphasize personal freedom and individual goals. So when you get to big decisions about parenting or gender roles, you can see how these completely different worldviews could create some really unexpected conflict. Of course, these pressures aren't just coming from inside the family. Interracial couples also have to navigate a world that is often biased against them. And that constant external stress can just chip away at their bond. It can create a real emotional disconnect if they don't face it together as a united front. This pressure from society can look like anything from whispers and stares in a restaurant all the way to open hostility. I mean, can you imagine having to constantly be on guard, analyzing every single interaction? It's just emotionally exhausting. And it can lead couples to isolate themselves, especially if they happen to live in less diverse communities. And these challenges, they don't just stop with the couple. They create these ripples that go outward, having a profound generational impact. And that brings us to a really crucial question. How does all this affect their children? This is such an essential question for parents. How do you help a child build a strong, confident sense of self when the world around them might be constantly questioning their identity or trying to make them feel like they're somehow other? Well, the most effective approach seems to be a proactive one. This means actively celebrating all sides of their heritage through stories, food, family traditions, you name it. It means creating a home where they feel totally safe to ask those tough questions about their identity. And it means being their number one staunchest advocate when they encounter bias out in the world. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on the challenges, so let's shift gears and talk about solutions. Because here's the thing, when couples navigate these hurdles successfully, they don't just survive them. These challenges can actually become the very things that make their relationship stronger and more resilient. Think about it. Constantly having to defend your relationship has to be draining. So instead of just reacting in the moment, it really helps to have a plan. This 3-step approach is a great tool. It allows couples to set firm boundaries, lean on their allies, and, most importantly, to refocus on the strength of their own bond. And that brings us to this really vital piece of advice from Dr. Rashana Chappell. You can't do this alone. Resilience is built in community. Having friends, family, or other couples who truly understand your journey, well, that isn't just a nice to have, it's absolutely essential. Ultimately, all of these strategies really rely on one thing: teamwork. And communication is the absolute bedrock of that team. This means planning for how you'll handle prejudice before it happens. And as you see here, it means acknowledging differences in power and privilege, which really just means recognizing that each partner might navigate the world differently based on their race, and that shapes their experiences. It's about a real commitment to being active allies for each other every single day. So, we'll leave you with this question to ponder. When love meets prejudice, is it more powerful to set a boundary or to build a bridge? There's no single right answer here. Sometimes the goal is connection and understanding, but other times the top priority has to be self-preservation, and learning to tell the difference, well, that's a core part of the journey.